Hello and welcome back to Lorcana Villain. My name is Baker, and today is our next group podcast on the channel. I'm going to keep this intro short and sweet because we chatted for a good hour and 10 minutes. My guests for this episode of the group podcast, first of all, we have Kawa, who you may recognise from the Lorcana podcast. We have Bannibal Harca, who you may recognise from the Bannibal Harca YouTube channel. And we have Ed Lorcana, the winner of DLC Fort Worth. We're going to talk all about Set 5, our thoughts and predictions going into DLC Seattle, and we're going to have a look at a few upcoming cards from Set 6 that we think have some potential. A quick shout out to the channel sponsor, Cardmarket. If you're looking for Lorcana singles at competitive rates, then check out Cardmarket. But let's jump straight in and have a chat. And here they are, the men, the myth, the legends, as promised, three of the finest minds in Lorcana, fellow content creators and very accomplished players. A huge welcome to Bannibal Harca, to Ed, and to Kawa. Faces I'm sure everyone already knows and that you know these people well. And we've got a lot of conversation points we want to hit. I want to aim for about an hour. We may go slightly over, but I know Ed in particular is doing this on his lunch break. So a huge shout out to you in particular. And this was very last minute for it. It was last minute for everyone, so thank you. But Ed in particular, I know this was super last minute, so thank you all for being there. So there's a few things I wanted to discuss tonight. Set 5 meta, Seattle predictions. I'm going to give you guys an early look at my ultra data that I've been assembling with like the most popular decks throughout the format so far and get your initial impressions. Is anything surprises you or not? And we're also going to talk a little bit about a card or two from set 6 that's been revealed that these guys may find interesting. So we're going to start off quite an open question, so feel free to talk about it from any aspect that you like, and we'll start with you, Kawa, and we'll give different people a chance to start. And again, I know this is a very open question. Has set 5 been a good meta in your opinion?
I think it has been a good meta, in my opinion. I think we've seen a little bit of development throughout the meta. At the start, it seemed to be very much about Amber Steel. Amber Steel was kind of dominating the beginning of the Set 5 metagame, and then Red Blue began to rise up again, and obviously Green Steel winning Vegas really took over the meta, especially in America. This is something I do want to get your guys' thoughts on, because for the most part, I do really think that I just came off the back of casting an event in EU where Green Steel did win. However, it was
the only one,
like,
right?
incredibly underrepresented in my opinion. For some reason, I don't know, the Americans seem to absolutely love Green Steel, and a lot of the European players are big Red Blue players. But in general, do I think it's been a good meta? I think it has been a good meta, but the interesting thing, if you actually look at it, is it's still been very similar to the Set 4 meta in terms of the decks have very much remained the same. They've just all got kind of additional tools. Red Blue got better because it got these extra ramp tools in the form of Tipo. Amber Steel got better, if you want to call it like that, with the inclusion of Pete Referee, but the deck still, the core to the deck hasn't really changed. So, from Set 4 meta to Set 5 meta, it's basically kind of remained the same, except Green Steel has just shifted. Instead of it being the bulky Green Steel, it's this kind of other version, but still very heavily featured on the discard side of things. But for the most part, I think it's been good. When it comes to Set 6, I really do want to see a shakeup, and because we've seen like maybe a very minimal change between Set 4 and Set 5, I am a little worried, a little concerned. I do hope that we get to see a big shakeup within Set 6. Like, it's really cool to see all of these, pirate decks and cool pirate cards being pushed, but I just hope that there are some very powerful cards within these kind of deck archetypes to really be able to kind of take over the meta, because I want to explore with some other stuff. It's clear that they're printing cards to support these kind of underrepresented ink color combinations, but like I would like to see some different types of decks moving into Set 6 rather than just slight adaptations. But maybe that's just my opinion. Maybe the competitive community as a whole likes to have these ink color combinations that we've had for the past 3, 4, 5 sets and keep gradually iterating upon it. But I'll ask yourself, Bannibal and Ed, what are your thoughts on the metagame so far?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, I would agree for the most part that it's been a good format. I think, we've got sort of 5 really big decks that are pretty viable as far as taking down a tournament, which is great. I think that's a pretty good number, really, for any card game. I would agree with the sentiment that it's a little bit annoying that it's kind of the same decks we had last set, and a lot of those were holdovers from the set before that. Something like Ruby Amethyst has been really good in the game since set 1, and there are other ink combinations that simply don't seem to have the tools to compete. And I don't know if it's like a design philosophy issue where if an ink combination doesn't have good draw power and good removal, like you just can't play it. But it's kind of starting to feel like there are certain ink combinations that you'd have to print something kind of crazy overpowered to even make them viable, or make some synergy between the two ink colors that simply doesn't work outside that two color pair. But overall, I mean, there's nothing really to complain about. I think, you've seen Amber Steel was really good. Red Blue picked up to take out Amber Steel. Green Steel has been taking down big tournaments. Yeah, I don't know. I like it overall.
Yeah, in terms of variation, it's definitely improvement from the days of set 1 and 2. And yeah, move over to you, Ed, and your impression on that. And like kind of going off the back of something that Kawa brought up in terms of discard. So obviously you ran Ruby Amethyst with your Fort Worth victory, but I also know that you were a big part of that conversation that's been going on for a while. Again, Kawa said the Green Steel deck coming out seemingly out of nowhere. Like maybe not for certain people in America, but like for Birmingham, it was not on the radar at all. But yeah, Vegas did extremely well, courtesy of Zan Syed. And for people that watch most Lorcana content, anyone that watched Zan's talking about that, you were part of that conversation about the design and like of that deck coming up. So yeah, your thoughts on the meta, and in particular, how do you feel about Green Steel discard at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think for 5 decks being like viable, I think that's a pretty healthy meta, but I think it makes going to like DLCs much harder because you have to prepare for way more decks, right? Like I know there's some people that want to just like play mirrors all day, for example, like set 3. I just wanted to play like Ruby Amethyst mirrors all day just because I felt like I had an edge in that sense, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot harder to prepare your deck because like you could just run into the wrong decks and you're out of the tournament, right? Because I also think that it's hard because all the answers you need to bring for all the decks are all different, right? It's vastly different. Like right now, the top 2 decks, Red, Blue, and Amber Steel, right? Like totally different decks that you have to prepare for. And in terms of green discard, I think people historically like playing discard, but after Bucky got banned, I think, or not banned, okay, he got changed. But I think people were like kind of off of it because that was like the obvious way, right? And I think people started to realize like there's actually like alternative ways to get discard, but just a little bit slower. Because there was already discard with green yellow, but then there was an issue with like being able to control the board, right? And they eventually figured out like, oh, we can actually just keep this Ursula like singing package and then add, the hypnotize for the control element later. So I think, eventually people figured out this card is still very strong, and as long as you can control the board in the beginning, then you'll win in the end.
That's the key difference I feel in terms of the green steel list. Like as a lover of the amber emerald list, it's something I agree with, and I started to play a little bit against emerald steel. And I'm like, yeah, this is, in my opinion, it's clearly the better deck. From obviously we've seen from tournament performances, but when you pair that discard element against those slower control decks, but then you also have the utility to use that 3-cost Ursula paired alongside these, damage removal songs like Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of Raging Fire. You have both of the elements there, right? You can kind of switch on. You can go 2 different directions, and that works really, really well. Whereas like even just the Amber Emerald deck, while it's a super, super powerful deck, pretty much has just this one game plan and can often struggle if it doesn't, establish that Prince John or that Diablo in the early game. If you don't have that kind of draw engine, it's simply going to lose. Whereas while those cards are also incredibly valuable within the Emerald Steel deck, if you can even get the 3-cost Ursula and potentially deal with your opponent's board, if it's a bit more of kind of a mid-range or tempo deck, you're not completely out of the game. So yeah, I think overall the Emerald Steel innovation by Zan and yourself, Ed. I remember, Ed, you actually showed me like a very early version of Emerald Steel back in DLC Toronto for some side events, and I was like, oh, this man is cooking right now. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I played against Zan. Oh, sorry.
No, go on. No, please go on.
Oh, I was gonna say, I did
you're
play
my guests.
Yeah, so I mean, I did play against Zan like when he was at Toronto, and he was playing like Amber Steel, right? And we were trying to figure out like if this like Clarabelle kind of Cloud Kicker shell would work with like Mother Gothel, right? Like the theory behind that deck was actually the complete opposite, right? It's try to have your opponent just send all their cards back to their hand and then refresh your hand and then start blasting away with like Zeus and like all the kill spells. But I think he didn't like the fact that, you know, your opponent has a bunch of cards, right? Usually that's not very good in terms of like if you play against red blue, their cards are way more powerful than yours, right? So the different angle that I think he thought of was like, let's instead try to just discard their whole hand and then draw cards after that.
Yeah, like you say, Kawa, you mentioned about, or someone mentioned about how, like, because Bucky got a rod, and I actually think it was you, Ed, because Bucky got a rod, a lot of people just were like, oh, well, this is just dead now. But when you look at the sort of access to cards again, like one that I really want to highlight, and we're going to talk about in a bit more detail in a moment, is the Prince John, obviously open to both, whether you're Emerald Steel or Emerald Amber. Kawa, you did super well winning the content creator tournament with that, which was, for doubters, that was a tough field. There was some, like, with the international guests, there was, that was a tight, like, it may have been a limited invitation, but that was, as someone that's been at all of them, that was a tough field. So did super well with that, and obviously Emerald Steel, we've been seeing that do super well. But yeah, Prince John is one of these cards that, like, whichever way you take it, it's just the static card advantage that it generates is so good. And yeah, the other thing you mentioned about decks kind of looking the same, that's kind of what I want for Lorcana, is like, I don't mind it being 5 decks, but I would like it to be, if you're playing this ink combination, you could be playing still one of 2 quite distinct decks that might have a few crossover cards, but that's what I want, really, just enough stuff in the ink pool that just because they turn 1 Porpsicle doesn't know that you know they're 60 straight away, because that's normally the case, or as soon as, especially if they show their second colour, which is probably red, occasionally steel, which is rising a bit, blue steel, because of the rise of green steel, obviously, and this is the way the meta works. But yeah, so overall we're agreed it's been a good meta, but I do want to talk about your thoughts on any problematic cards that we may have in format. So I've mentioned a couple. I've already prepped these guys with kind of like my line of questioning, and I've given a couple of examples, and I'm also going to give you the chance to bring up anything that you think that's not on my list that you would like to discuss. But I want to start with the things that I've put, and some of these are going to be very old hat and like old conversations that have been happening for a while, but I've picked these because I browse social media a lot, and my finger tends to be on the pulse of Lorcana, and these are the ones that the last month or so I'm seeing come up again in conversation a lot. So whether that's just rehashing old conversation for some, or newer players to the game, which we always want to encourage and, you know, bring up to date, there's a couple of cards I want to talk about, whether or not you guys think that they are problematic. And I'll let you, like, there's 3, so I'll let you all start on one each. So the first one is Diablo, the 3-cost uninkable Diablo. Is there anyone that would like to start with a strong opinion on why this card might be a problem, or it is not a problem because X?
I mean, I can go. I mean, I think all these cards are problematic that you described, like Diablo, Prince John, Hiram, even like to some extent Rabbit, because they're all like the draw engines and also Beast. They're the draw engines of the deck, right? And I think what happens is if you leave those cards unchecked, you basically lose the game instantly. And I think that's what kind of leaves a sour taste in like a lot of people's mouths. It's like, I have to run something to deal with draw engine cards, right? So if you think about the popular ones, you're basically down to like playing Ruby, right? To kill Diablo with like Brawl, or Beast with like Medusa, right? That's why Medusa is so popular right now. It kills all the engines, right? It doesn't kill Prince John, but it kills like all the other important engine cards. And if you don't run Ruby, then it's like, what's your answer to Hiram, right? And I think that's the main issue that everyone's having right now specifically, because Steel does have, you know, Baboom or Smash, Fire the Cannon Storm to kill Diablo, or Zeus to kill Beast sometimes, but they have no answers to Hiram, right? There's nothing that does 6 very easily. So if you're playing a Steel deck and you see Hiram, then you're just kind of like dead, right? So I think that's kind of the issue right now. There's not enough solution cards to these draw engines in like other colors besides Ruby. And that's like, and if you don't draw them, you instantly lose right away. And I think that's why Green Steel is so popular, because they have the highest density of these draw engine cards, right? It has Diablo and Beast, versus like in Green Yellow, you only have Diablo. So you basically always present this, you know, problem card, and if you don't deal with it instantly, you lose the game.
Yeah, that's a really fair point, and I think people's like other answer against these cards like Flaversham, if they don't, like, the only other option that you can kind of choose besides playing maybe like Ruby to easily remove the Flaversham of the Diablo, is to then play the Emerald package of Diablo plus Prince John. If you can establish the Diablo before the Flaversham comes down, you're going to get a huge card advantage off of that. You'll be able to basically keep your hand constantly fueled to then, if the Ruby Sapphire player is able to constantly remove your threats, you're going to be able to keep refueling, use your discard cards to get rid of whatever cards they have in their hand, use your tech cards like the 2-cost Ursula to snipe out the Be Prepared, prevent the big Sisus from coming down. And there's one card that I think has particularly helped, and not particularly helped, but especially in that Emerald package. Like I am a big fan of Hidden Cove in general to really increase the value of keeping this Diablo on board. Because as you mentioned, Ed, if this Diablo goes unchecked, often that is going to be how you win the game, and it's super important. And there's a big conversation I've been having with a lot of people. It's like some people I've heard are even only running one because they're like, well, if you get the one, then you're never going to draw another one, so it's fine. And I've heard other people say, oh, the card's so good, I want to have 4 because if I get this opener, it's absolutely insane. So like that's an interesting thing. It's kind of like in general, it's a good card, but it's a bit of a weird card in my eyes. It's maybe a like win more card, but it is also essential in some matches where if you get that opener, it's pretty much unbeatable. And not only just for the opener, but also maybe in the mid to late game in very weird niche circumstances. For example, you put your Diablo into the Hidden Cove, it's going to protect it from the big legendary Sisu from coming down. If you move your Prince John into the Hidden Cove, it's going to protect it from the Grab Your Swords. Even though I think like people trying to put grab your swords back in their decks to deal with Prince John, it's probably necessary in any of these steel decks. Like, you know, Amber Steel has been cutting them recently before the rise of Green Steel. I'm actually not even too sure in general if they've been opting to put it back in to specifically deal with that matchup, or they simply say with the Prince John hits the board, I just can't deal with it anyways, right? So it's interesting.
Yeah, what's your thoughts, Bannibal, on like these, whether it's these examples I've given, which, yeah, the examples I gave were Diablo, Prince John, and Flaversham, but so yeah, your thoughts on them or anything else that you think might be a problem?
Yeah, I think these 3 definitely are the problematic cards if you're going to have the conversation. There are some other cards you could talk about, like Rabbit, I agree, but these 3 are the ones that come to mind. You know, I think Diablo sort of in a vacuum is like the most powerful card in the game right now. Flaversham, really close to Diablo, but costs 1 more, has some advantages like being inkable, harder to remove. But my least favorite card of the 3 is Prince John. And I've been kind of beating the drum about Prince John and Bucky since set 2. I've always said that these are my least favorite cards in the game. I think, you know, I can look at them without having played any of the game, and I can tell you this is like inherently problematic design space that they just should never have walked into, in my opinion. You should not be putting card advantage engines on cards that are difficult to interact with and cheap to play. And that's sort of my biggest problem with Prince John specifically, which is that it comes down on turn 3, which is pretty early for a card advantage engine. And then most of the cards you might want to play to remove it just don't work. And then you've got things like Grab Your Sword, which yeah, I mean, Blue Steel is still playing a lot of Grab Your Sword, but you then, you know, a set or 2 later printed the 2-drop Ursula, which now takes out Grab Your Sword, and so you've got, you know, a card that you already want to play in Ursula, which is just great in basically any Emerald deck, and it just protects both your Diablo and your Prince John as card advantage engines, and you've got, you know, Pete and Emerald Steel basically doing the same thing. And I don't like card advantage engines that are hard to answer. So Diablo, very powerful, but at least like if you want to beat Diablo, you can build a deck to beat Diablo. That's not a hard ask. It's a lot harder with Prince John because you're like, oh, I'll put Grab Your Sword in my deck, I'll sweep them away, and then they just take it with Ursula, and that plan is suddenly completely out the window. You know, Be Prepared gets everything, but they're trying to discard your hand. It's hard to get to 7 with cards in your hand, so on and so forth.
I will beat the drum to the end of time that Be Prepared is like the most fair card in the game and necessary.
I agree with you. I think Be Prepared is important. I don't think it's broken. I think it's just a very good card. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of Prince John. As far as Beast,
of the 3,
I know
that's my least favorite for sure.
And I don't think it's like I think the other 2 are better. I just think that you can't answer Prince John as easily. Like, it's hard to beat if you want to beat it.
That also means that, like, yeah, like a lot of these decks, like you mentioned, it's like they're so predicated. Like I mentioned the Amber Emerald deck, and even the Green Steel deck, they're so predicated on you really take advantage of the mulligan in Lorcana. You say, okay, I just want a mulligan for this Prince John Diablo, and if you get those, even one of them in your opening hand, that's really strong. If you get both of them in your opening hand, that's absolutely insane. And even with the addition, like I'm a big fan of a lot of the innovation that went into the current Emerald Steel deck, because the inclusion of the morph kind of in the 2-drop Bookie slot, instead of Bookie being there, it's kind of this morph. You have the ability, it's not always the case, but you do have the ability to play like a 1-drop and 1, which is usually Diablo. The earlier you can shift the Diablo, usually the better. But even if you don't shift it as early, on 2 you can do morph, and then on 3, if you can't do the potential, like, you know, shifting the Beast is incredibly powerful, shifting the Robin Hood is incredibly powerful, but you could even just go shift Diablo and then hard cast a Diablo. If you got 2 Diablos on the board that your opponent has to answer, if they remain and they start to pop off, it's absolutely insane. It's so difficult for your opponent to beat. But yeah, it really shows you the power of the Lorcana mulligan as well, where people say, right, yeah, I'll literally mulligan 6 or mulligan 7. That oftentimes happens, I feel, in a lot of these Emerald decks, and that's how a lot of the competitive players are winning their games with these decks. They know how to abuse the mulligan. They know exactly what cards they need in their starting hand, and yeah, it's definitely frustrating. I mean, in the finals of the Lorca Quest, the 707 player event I casted over this weekend, we saw the Emerald Steel player do the Diablo opener 3 games in a row against the red blue player. And it was, yeah, I could see the frustration on their face. It's
I can feel
so,
it.
yes, it's so tough to deal with, honestly.
Yeah, I don't know if you score for the content creator event. I obviously recorded my games and put them up as content, and I did not play the best in that event, hands up. But that's a separate point to the fact that the 2 green steel players I faced, both games 1, 2, and 3, it was always 2-1. Had it. Just had it. All of it. So yeah, I see your point, but then it begs the question, to kind of like move us along a little bit. It begs the question, what is the solution to this? And like, I think the 2 of the sort of like big, more obvious ways that you look at an answer is, 1, do more things get Bucky treatment, which, spoilers, I would rather we didn't have a bunch more cards that are errated and changed like that. I would rather that wasn't normalized. Do we change things, or is it just a case of printing more answers available in different colors and things like that, which I think there's a strong argument for, but I do want to press onset it by adding the issue I've got with like just creating a lot of easy ways suddenly to hit ready characters with ward is because they don't all need to be as broken as Prince John. There could be some quite reasonable warded characters that you can keep safe by just having them sit readied and not many things can interact with them, but they are not offering this sort of busted static draw engine sort of thing like Prince John is doing. Like, an example card I thought of when I was kind of like trying to articulate this in my mind earlier was, you think of the 2-drop Lumiere who has the static, all characters get +1 strength. If that was warded, maybe it would need to be a cost more. That would be perfectly reasonable as something like, hey, I can probably never touch this Lumiere outside of board wipe, but its effect is not so oppressive that it is completely making me have to build my deck to play around this Lumiere. So that's just like one in the shot example. But yeah, your thoughts. Start with you, Ed. Like, what do you think is the answer to this? Or is it just okay to have a meta where, hey, your deck isn't always going to be able to answer everything? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, you could go that way, but I think the problem is like I think nobody would still play stuff like Lumiere, because I think the thing about Green Steel is that it's always like an advantage like card game, right? Like you're usually able to like get a card and make them lose a card. So that's like a 2-card swing.
Yeah.
I think things like that makes the game like really hard to do versus like I'm gonna buff all my characters like +1. Like I think it's like a trope in TCGs, right? Where it's like you try to get the +1, or like, you know, you try to get the pluses as much as possible to kind of limit your, and then try to make your opponent minus, right? In order to limit their options. And I think that's why this is just like the best deck in general. And I think usually card games go like the power creep route, right? It's like, now we need a Diablo for every color, and then now it's like quote unquote fair because now everyone has access to the same draw engines. But right now we're kind of limited to like Diablo, Prince John, which are, you know, both in green, and then Beast is in steel and Hiram is in blue, right? So you basically have to play one of these colors, or you just go like the aggro strategy, right? Where you just don't care about cards, you're just putting all your guys sideways, and then that's how you win.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like, just to be clear, like, I'm not suggesting this Lumiere is a good card. It's just an example as like of something that would be hard to interact with, but is not busted. So we don't need to suddenly give every color. Oh, now you can answer everything. Like you can challenge a ready character. Like that is a super rare ability, and I want it to stay that way. So I would just rather we didn't get these sort of like over busted ones. Banacle, your thoughts on how we solve this, or is it just okay? For like again, I think that's an argument. It like potentially for like, hey, your deck isn't always going to be able to answer everything as long as everyone's got a thing. Is that okay?
I think there's a few thoughts I have about that. First of all, there's always going to be a best card. There's no way, you know, you could ban these cards, then, you know, okay, well, now Rabbit's a problem, so on. I don't necessarily think that you can ever prevent there from being certain cards that are warping the metagame. I would try to avoid ones like Prince John, which are difficult to answer. And I know I had made a tweet at some point that gained some traction, which was basically, I can't believe we have 5 sets and no good answers to Prince John. But
yeah, I remember that tweet. I think I liked it.
It's I don't know. For that one specifically, I think they should just print an answer and steal. It should just be like uninkable 3 cost, deal 2 damage to everything. Your characters, their characters, whatever. Now, I mean, and please don't make it a song for the love of God. But I think that one's one they should just print an answer for. As far as the other two, I think that Diablo's an okay to have card as the best card in the game, just because
I think
it's so easy to
Diablo's
answer.
the most reasonable, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, when they have like the nuts with Cove and like all this like and they have it turn 2, yeah, but in like on its own, most decks have evasive, and if you don't have evasive, you probably have something that does 2 damage.
Yeah, so it's annoying. It's a very strong card. It will win a lot of games, but I think that's okay in my opinion to have as the best card in the game. Flowerstrom, I think we need to have, I don't know, something to make like Amber better. Would be a cheap, you know, we have World's Greatest Criminal Mind. Maybe for Willpower we could have a similar card to that.
Yeah,
to
that's
answer
what I'm
Flowerstrom
waiting
would be
for.
really nice. And
we've got to get something that
I don't
cares
know.
about willpower, because we've got nothing in the game at the moment that cares about how much willpower you have or anything like that.
And most characters have more willpower than
raising it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I would like answers for some of those things. You know, I've played a lot of Magic. My favorite formats have always been the older formats where answers tend to be better than threats. You know, I don't necessarily think that that's the modern design philosophy for most TCGs. They don't necessarily want answers to be better than the threats, and I understand why. But I do think that they could be a little bit better. There's some room in there to even it out a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. As far as like bannings, I think bannings are better than erratas, and I don't necessarily think any of these cards need to be banned. But I don't like the idea of errataing. I think it's weird. It's confusing.
I think the main reason it was done on Bucky in particular, and I do agree with Ed, by the way, that I like the card is basically unplayable. Like they might as well have banned the card, but the reason why they didn't specifically ban the card is the game is still currently about to release within the Asian region, so within Japan, within China. So I think the philosophy around that was they didn't want to ban a card when this region is only getting access to this set, so instantly there's a card that they can get out of a box but they can't play with. So I think that's the reason why they changed it so drastically to basically make it unplayable. But it's also weird that they still haven't answered or they still haven't, like, I don't know, as far as I'm aware, they haven't really given stores like a replacement Bucky. Like if you still have a new player who comes into the game and you play Bucky against him, you say, oh, sorry, it doesn't do this, it does X, Y, and Z, and the players will be like, what do you mean? Like, I'm surprised they haven't acted on that yet, but maybe they're not really worried because they're like, okay, we've butchered him so hard, who is actually going to play Bucky now? But something should still be done about that. I'm curious as to why maybe they're a little bit slower on that at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I hope, like, again, I'm sure we'll get clarification at some point. But I want to move us along a little bit. We're about halfway through at the moment, but we're making good time. And yeah, like, when the conversation's cooking, I'm hesitant to move us along. But we are very close to our final DLC of the year, which is super exciting. Seattle. I haven't actually asked, Bannibal, Ed, are either of you going?
Yes.
I'll be there, yeah.
You are both going. Excellent.
Everyone's giving me FOMO. Oh, I've had such FOMO.
Oh, mate,
this
I'm
week,
the same,
honestly.
man. I'm exactly, especially when I saw the photo of Spessy and Moyen on the flight. Like, I knew it was coming. Like, ever so I was like, everyone's going, man. So yeah, I'm exactly the same. For me, it's that As far as I know, there are no plans for me to be working at Worlds, and I need to be at Worlds. There is no way I am missing first World Championship, and if I was to pay for this, that bankrupts me. There's no way. Christmas is cancelled, and there's no way I'm going to Worlds next year unless I get hired to work. Please, Ravensburger. But anyway, we've got DLC Seattle coming up very, very soon. And yeah, we're going to talk about a couple of things. First of all, I want to talk your predictions about what you expect to be the most popular decks in the room. And I have started putting together my Ultra data. By the time you guys are seeing this at home, this will be coming out on Wednesday. My Ultra data has already been released with like all of it finished. But at time of recording, I'm about halfway through. But I'm going to show these guys basically data from the last month. Every event over 30 players, so like I try and be strict with that to like kind of have a good assurance that there's a relatively good talent pool in the room. Not that it can't be the case for smaller events, but I'm just playing the numbers. So yeah, every event over 30 players in the last month, and I've basically taken every single, all based on what's been uploaded to inkdex.com. Obviously, like I can't draw data out of nowhere. But that is the best source of data, and basically put together all of the decks that have been represented. I've got the exact numbers for everything that's made a top cut, been first place and second place. So I'll be keen to know if there's any surprises. So before we take a look at it, I would like to get your thoughts on what you expect. And we'll start with you, Kawa. What do you expect to be the most popular deck in the room? Or you can name a couple by all means in Seattle.
I still think that the most popular deck will probably be Ruby Sapphire. That's going to be my shout. I know a lot of the NA players are really high in Emerald Steel at the moment, but it's Ruby Sapphire has been around for a couple of sets. A lot of people are big fans of the deck. They know how to play the deck. I think there can be some adjustments that can be made to that deck to actually make the Emerald Steel matchup even more favorable. Some stuff that Moyne has mentioned in the past, like really upping your Medusa count back up to 4. Stuff like that. Really going to be able to focus on taking out some key threats like the Beast and stuff. But I'm going to say, again, I'm not going to jump too deep into exact ordering of what's going to be, but I do think that Ruby Sapphire is going to be up there. But overall, I think, as Bannibal mentioned, we've had these like top 5 ink colors in pretty much every event so far, and I would be very surprised to see if that changes. The order can change, of course, but the one thing I will say is I do think that Emerald Amethyst might be on the decline at the moment. It was, again, I think it was overrepresented at this previous event I attended this weekend, but I feel like maybe some people are potentially falling off the deck, but I'd be intrigued to see. But I'm going to say red blue for the top list.
I think it's funny that Kawa mentioned Green Steel being overrated in NA or played more in NA than EU. Because I think from our perspective, and maybe Ed would disagree with me, but it would seem to me that maybe Emerald Amethyst was more popular in EU than here in NA.
Oh, that's fair. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, especially the last couple of events, the EU events, EA Tempo has been very, very popular. Yeah, please.
I do think that Green Steel has been on the uptick, but based on the stats I've seen, I think people are talking about it like it's the second most played deck, and it just isn't that. And it has not been that as far as I could tell. And maybe I'm wrong. I know a lot of people have been really, really worried about it, and I look at results and I don't know again what the full picture is, but I would guess at Seattle that it'll be blue red, then Steel Song. Then I would expect Ruby Amethyst. Then I would expect Green Steel, then Green Purple, and then Blue Steel after that. If you want to know, that's my guess.
Blue Steel's been on the rise for sure. Yeah, like much more than it was before Vegas. And yeah, Ed, any different thoughts?
Yeah, I would say what he said was basically my top 6. I think it's also debatable if you want to put yellow purple hyper aggro as number 6, because it does so well into like red blue, right? And I think another thing is that for results wise, I think a lot of new players are picking up this kind of new version of Green Steel, thinking it's very similar to Bucky, but I would say it's actually very different, and it's like a very different kind of control playstyle where you can't just like vomit your whole hand, right? Because before it's just like, oh, do I have the Bucky Diablo Beast thing or another Diablo, and then I just win, right? I think there's actually a ton of sequencing, and like I've watched a lot of like Green Steel players make like a lot of not, I wouldn't say mistakes, but like kind of like mistakes in terms of like, just like randomly setting chilling or, just sequencing incorrectly. And I think that might lead to kind of poor results for the masses. But I would
Mhm.
say the experts of Green Steel, like for example, like Chris Louis, he's been like a Bucky player before, but when I played with him, he understood like the control aspect of the deck. And I think it made a lot of sense that Zan and Chris were in the finals. I think they both brought like the best deck of the format at the moment, before people are ready for it, right? And I think that's why they perform well. And I would say it takes a lot of reps to kind of replicate that. So I think that's why you don't really see the same results.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think sentiments are things have been pretty much the same for a little while now. Again, we've talked about things that have changed, specifically like the way green steel looks. But yeah, generally, like it's the same sort of decks you expect to be at the top. And what I'll do before I show you the latest Ultra data, we'll take a quick look at the previous Ultra data that I did. This was between the 10th of August to the 15th of September. So this was pre-Vegas, the data going into that. And this was how our metagame looked. Ruby Sapphire, vastly superior, like still Song not too far behind it, still with a really good season. But then pretty much what you'd expect, Ruby Amethyst, EA Tempo, and then, yeah, Green Steel was not being played an awful lot. But again, this was before Las Vegas, so a lot changes there. And if we now jump to the latest Ultra data, the current Ultra data, which is based on 233 decks, and again, events, all that have been reported to index.com of 30 or more players, which are all listed here and spilled over a little bit here. And this is how it's looked for the last month. And I was surprised because I was kind of with you, Bannibal, on terms of like Green Steel. I knew it was on the rise, but I did not think it was going to be this much when I added everything up. There may be a number or two off here, but I give you my absolute word. I've spent the last couple of days really like making sure this is as accurate as I think it can be. I've like triple counted everything. So while there may be a number off slightly here or there, I am pretty confident that this is an accurate representation. And yeah, Green Steel, and I'll be honest with you, a lot of it has been in the last couple of weeks. Especially you see a victory here, here, and here, and then obviously there's been more Green Steel that didn't come first or second, but made top cut, so contributed towards this number. So yeah, it's a lot of it has been the last couple of weeks, really. Like I would say a good maybe 15 to 20 of those Green Steels have come from the last couple of weeks. So like a huge shoot up in preparation for Seattle. So maybe that in itself is telling of a lot of people suddenly playtesting this in preparation for Seattle. But yeah, your thoughts and your reactions to this. Are there any huge surprises and anything you want, like anything here that you want to point out as interesting?
Well, I'm obviously a little bit surprised.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I pulled. So you got this weekend in there, this last weekend.
Yes. So the latest events, yeah. So we've got Lorca Quest here, and then France Gaming, another one in France, Geeky Tees in USA, but I've only got one list from that, and then over the break.
I wonder if that skewed it a little more even than I'd seen, because I had not looked since this last weekend at all at what the stats were. So on one hand, I'm surprised because I didn't actually think it was this popular. On the other hand, I'm not that surprised because I do actually think Green Steel is the best deck. So
just didn't think as many other people thought that.
Well, I think a lot of people did, but I think Ed pointed out some stuff that I totally agree with, which is that I played Green Steel for the first time this last weekend to try it. And I played fine. I mean, I made top 4 and lost to Blue Steel in top 4, but it was hard. And I had played Green Steel in the past, and I know this time I did not play. Well, certainly not flawlessly, but I mean, there were points where I was like, well, I definitely could do some stuff differently. I'm sure there are better lines than whatever I'm taking. And I think in the past, especially with Bucky, I think Bucky made the deck easier. It was often like just kind of curve out, play your Floodborn after Bucky and sort of cheese them out. And then your cards were so powerful. So the thing about Ursula is I think singing songs with Ursula can be hard, but I also think it kind of doesn't matter what you do. It's sort of hard to lose once you start singing songs with Ursula a lot of the times. But I do think that right now the deck is hard. It's harder to play than it used to be. And yeah, I think it's scary that it's doing that well, and I think is somewhat difficult to play. And yeah, maybe Blue Steel is gonna be the pick. I don't know.
It is a choice. I mean, like that 7. I showed you the one from beforehand, which was like Blue Steel's had a huge rise. Where is it? Yeah, so 8 tops, 1 second place. So that in itself has doubled. Ed, does this surprise you to see Emerald Steel right at the top here? Again, this is predominantly US. Again, they're like, there's a good amount of EU events in here as well. But yeah, all larger events, there are a couple of examples, 29 players, 28 players, just because I wanted to like boost the numbers up a little bit. But yeah, does this surprise you? Or does anything here surprise you?
I mean, I personally played in 2 set champs. There were like 26 people, and I won both of them. But that's not the point. But for Green Steel, it doesn't surprise me just because I think there's gonna be somebody that's gonna play it because I think it's also volume, right? Like I don't know if you can like I don't know if you like check how many. It's hard to check, right? How many people are playing what decks? I guess you can't check on ink decks, but like I think somebody is gonna just high roll out of their minds and like they literally just cannot lose that day. And I think one good example was Zan. Like, of course, he's a good player, but like if you looked at his draws for that tournament, it was like insane. Always opening, like Shift Diablo, kill everything on your board, and then you just win the game, right? And I think
he said it himself in his content after, where he was like, "I thought of a card and I drew it."
Sometimes you spiral out of your mind, right? And that's kind of it, right? It's like luck meets skill, right?
Yeah.
So if you have both, of course you're gonna win the tournament. And I think out of all the decks, Green still definitely has the highest high roll potential, where it's just completely uninteractable and you just straight up lose the game. There's nothing you could do against it, and I think that's what's kind of frustrating players that play against it.
Yeah. Kawa, your thoughts on this? And I know you said that you felt like Amber Emerald was falling off a bit, and yeah, that kind of is the case. I mean, it's a deck that comes up and does well a lot, but yeah, only 12 tops. There's also 3 over here from an aggro version. But yeah, this pretty much where you predicted it would be. But yeah, any surprises here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that Amber Emerald is so low. Like, I still think it's a very powerful deck, but by no means that I think it was actually ever a tier 1 deck. I think it was very, very much in the tier 2 slot. But what's interesting, I think, is if there's a lot of players that have previously played the Amber Emerald deck. Like Ed was mentioning, it's not the Emerald Steel deck is not how the Bookie deck was. Like, I think if you're pretty good with your sequencing from the Amber Emerald deck, and you want to try out this Emerald Steel deck, I think the players who have really mastered the yellow green deck will do quite well on Green Steel, honestly. But yeah, I'm still surprised to see it so well represented. And this we could definitely see a potential rise in Sapphire Steel come out to maybe contest these Green Steel matchups. Ed, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from what I've been hearing, I didn't actually watch the video, but when Zan was talking about specific matchups for Green Steel, I think he said the only matchup that he doesn't feel great into is their mirror match. This is something I was talked about a lot over the weekend as well, and it is a very uncomfortable match to play, in my opinion, because oftentimes you can find yourself locked in this weird situation where, let's say one player has a Prince John down on the board, the opponent has an exerted Diablo, and if there's no way to get rid of that Diablo, if you want to start taking advantage of, discarding your opponent's cards, whatever cards are going to get discarded, they're going to get drawn right back with that Diablo. That's been a situation that I've had when I've played the yellow-green versus green-steel, and it is just an absolutely unbearable position to be in. But I do think in the Emerald Steel match, there's more answers to that because you have those damage removal songs that maybe you will eventually be able to remove that Diablo. But I think the mirror match in general is never that fun to play. Also, not an easy matchup, but yeah, I think the data overall I'm quite surprised by. And I think, yeah, we'll see a fair amount of Green Steel within Seattle, but curious to see what the actual data will be. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if, I think currently we've seen Green Steel hovering around the 4th or 5th spot. It's either been like above Emerald Amethyst or below it. I wouldn't be surprised if it creeps into the top 3. I think that's probably more of a realistic thing to consider. But besides that, I still think that red blue will probably be the most represented deck, but maybe I'll be proved wrong. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was surprised to see red blue at only 31. Go ahead, Bannibal.
Yeah, I mostly just wanted to say I agree, but I do also think Green Steel plays well at set championships, perhaps better than it would at a big event. I think it's a really, really good local killer kind of deck. You know, when I go to locals, I see more jank than I would see at a DLC. I see more aggro than I would typically see at a DLC. So having a deck that's both proactive, low to the ground, and also has really strong interaction seems like kind of the perfect combination of stuff that you'd want to be doing at something like a set championship level. I think that maybe skews these numbers a little bit. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there will definitely be a factoring of that because, yeah, like you say, the set championships is where you're most likely to find, like, run into the random things. The Ruby Amethyst players are going to be playing Jim Hawkins and example of things that you wouldn't expect to see that you don't play around that, yeah, could potentially skew things to a degree. But, yeah, it was just interesting to get your thoughts on, like, your reactions to this data, if there was any surprises. Before I move us along into, because I do want to talk about a little bit about set six cards to come. We've got about maybe 10, 15 minutes before I want to call it. But yeah, if I was to ask for... I feel bad about asking, to be fair, Bannibal or Ed for a prediction of what's going to win DLC because you're going to be playing, and obviously I'm not going to ask you to tell us what you're playing. That's not something that you want every opponent of the day 4 days before the event when this comes out to like, oh, you just said what you're playing. But yeah, Kawa, if I was going to push you for a winner, if I was going to ask you for a prediction and to commit to it, what would it be?
Yeah, I think Emerald Steel is actually quite a safe pick.
Sensible choice.
Yeah, and it's not like, I mean, it's the safe answer because it did so well on the last one, but it's maybe not so much of a safe choice because maybe a lot more people are expecting it this time around. As Battle mentioned, it seems to perform very well in these kind of set championship events. Maybe it won't perform as well this time around in this larger scale event, but at the same time, as the boys mentioned, I think it's the deck that has the most pop-off potential. Maybe second to Amber Steel. Amber Steel, oftentimes, you know, sometimes they just have the absolute nuts opener with the Cinderella, into the Song, into the Aerial, Whole New World, that type of stuff. But Emerald Steel is the deck that can probably do some of the most unfair things in the game right now. And for that reason, if you can, you know, draw the specific cards and do those unfair things in most of your games, you have a decent chance of winning the entire event for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And yeah, just like last couple of things to point out that might be interesting. A bit of a rise in hyper aggro. Again, as you say, set championship data can sometimes skew that because like that's often when you find it the most. But it also performed pretty well at Vegas. So, and again, like if you're expecting a lot of red-blue, it is... If you kind of want to YOLO and hope for a favourable bracket, it is a way to potentially get there if players aren't playing around aggro. We all know what it can do. And like Ruby Amethyst, like... Ed, I know you're a fan. You won Fort Worth with it. Ruby Amethyst is my heart. But yeah, it is the kind of the deck you take to top but not to win. Is that a fair statement of how to describe Ruby Amethyst these days? If you just want to top, but you don't necessarily feel like you can go all the way, is this the deck to pick up these days?
I would. I mean, I'm biased. I guess I won with it, right? But I
yeah,
think
for sure.
I think there are ways to kind of tune Ruby Amethyst because I think a lot of people are saying basically Ruby Amethyst is usually bad in the beginning of the format because we don't know what we need to tech against, right? So as the meta develops and there's more meta decks emerging, we can kind of tune our decks in a way to try to beat the meta decks. Like over the weekend, I ran like a Finders Keepers list I put on Twitter, and it gained a lot of traction.
Finders Keepers at the moment. I'm really liking it.
Yeah, and I think it's because of the rise of Emerald Steel that we can play like 4 Finders Keepers, and basically the whole game plan for Ruby Amethyst now is to just keep your opponent off the draw engines, right? Like Brawl the Diablo, Medusa the Beast. And eventually you starve your opponent out of the game, and then you just hit them with Finders Keepers. And every time I play Finders Keepers against Emerald Steel, they're so upset. It's like, you know how they're upset when you discard your whole, like my whole hand? They have the same reaction when I place Finders Keepers, right? Into like a be prepared, and then they lose the game immediately, right? So I think there are definitely tools available for Ruby Amethyst to combat these decks. It's just a matter of like, you know, are you going to run into those decks into the tournament? And if you expect like a lot of Emerald Steel, I think, you know, Finders Keepers would be like a really good choice to include in Ruby Amethyst.
Yeah, no, I've been. It was from the Ludo Twitter event. What's his name? I keep forgetting. Like the Magic the Gathering Pro.
Guillaume Watapa.
That's the
Yeah.
one. Yeah, it topped Vegas. I think top 16. No, it was Birmingham. Well, yeah, top Birmingham. Sorry, I think it was top 16, and then made top 8 at Ludo Toiter, which was like 600 plus players, and then again made top cut, as you know yourself, Kawa, at Lorca Quest. Again, I'm not a Magic guy, so this was a new name to me, but certainly making a name for themselves, and like played Ruby Amethyst, no goats. Played Ruby Sapphire over Lorca Quest with no dime. So certainly an innovator, mad lad, I called him when I reviewed. But yeah, Finders Keepers, I'm right there with you. I'm super enjoying it. It's one of my sleeper picks for Seattle that I think you're going to see a lot, along with a rise in McDuck Manor, which is seeing a lot of success recently and coming out of the cobwebs. But let's move us along and talk a little bit about set 6. We've had a fair amount of the set revealed at this point. I think maybe 2/3, maybe just under, including a couple of reveals actually maybe an hour before we started this. I don't know if any of you have seen the latest. Well, one of them, I think, maybe the rest reveal that we've had so far. Cow, the look on your face tells me that you've seen the latest. But nonetheless, whether you've... Yeah, it's potentially the best one we've had so far. But we'll start with Bannibal, because especially if you haven't seen the newest ones. I asked the lads to pick 2. Let's start off with 1 each, just so that we hopefully don't cross over. So, Bannibal, what's a card in set 6 that you like or you think has potential?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of them. I really like the legendary Yzma. It's one of the better legendaries I think we've seen so far. I don't necessarily think it's like broken or anything, but it's nice.
It's reasonable.
Yeah, so it's a 4-cost inkable 3/3/2 in Amethyst. So basically the Dolores stat line, and you can exert to draw up to 3 or quest for 2. So it's like a nice, like a curve topper for an aggro deck. You can play it. It dodges a lot of the Ruby removal, gets under Sisu and Brawl, and then you can either drop to 3 or quest aggressively if you have resources. I think it's just a really nice all-around curve topper for Amethyst aggro decks.
Yeah, I agree. When I started doing my reviews the other day, I said it's probably already my favourite card that they've revealed. Potentially until an hour ago when they revealed another one. Ed, what's a card in the set that you like or you think has potential?
I think it's Prepare Your Bot. So I think right now, I think there's an uptrend of Sapphire Steel, and I think people are playing in a way where it's like the Aerial Dime checkmate deck, right? So basically, I think how the deck wants to operate now is like, how do you just play a single copy of Dime, and then the next turn you play Aerial, Dime it, and then the turn after that you can just do the whole thing, right? Like Dime, Aerial, Prepare Your Bot, Dime again, quest, you win the game, right? It's a literally 3-card like combo, like you just win the game outright. And I think that card is going to be extremely problematic because there's, like you said, there's not a lot of ways to deal with ward characters, right? Especially ones that have 3 strength, right? At least Prince John, you can hit it with like Sisu, right? The big legendary Sisu. But there's almost no ways to interact with Aerial except for Be Prepared specifically. And not even all like Ruby Sapphire decks are playing 4 copies, right? A lot of people are playing like the 4 legendary Sisu plus 2 Be Prepared style decks. So I think even for Seattle, I think these Aerial Dime decks are going to be highly represented. And I think this Prepare Your Bot will be even more degenerate because now you can really checkmate somebody by just hitting them with like Aerial Dime, Prepare Your Bot, win the game.
Yeah, and it's not like it's just like obviously Dime is probably the best example of advantage you can generate, but like there's plenty of items that we can like potentially re-ready and reuse and get value out of, and then like you add the is it or and to ready an inventor? Is it an or an and? Because that's definitely part of it. It can also ready an inventor.
Choose one.
No.
Choose one. So yeah, obviously the scenario we're painting here, we want to re-ready the item, but if we also in combination get a good inventor that has a reason to like, even if it's just keeping him safe, that's something. But if there's also
it's a robot character, not an inventor. It's a robot.
A robot. Yeah. There you go. If we get a robot who has a cool exert ability or on a or something like that, then just more synergy. So I think that's a super good choice. Kawa, your first choice for a card that you're excited for?
Yeah, I kind of have 2. I'll briefly mention. The first one is kind of a simple one, so I'll talk about this one quickly. It's just a Prince Philip within Emerald. It's 3-cost inkable 3/2 with ward. Quest for 2. Exactly what Ed was mentioning. I think this card is going to be quite strong indeed for multiple reasons. Again, it's a very cheap card with ward, as Bannibal mentioned. Now, it doesn't have that you know, incredibly annoying static effect where you can start to draw loads of cards, but it's still going to be very, very difficult to interact with. That three strength is definitely relevant because can't be interacted with by the big legendary Sisu. And if you're playing a deck that like you really, really, really want to rely on singing a particular song with, like your 3-drop just has to stick, this one could probably do it. Maybe that goes against the idea of the card because it's also questing for 2, but I just think a very, very solid uncommon card. And I think in general, a lot of the cards within Disney Lorcana, a lot of the uncommons, oftentimes have been the best. The Mr. Smee from set 3 comes to mind as one of the, that was my favorite card within set 3, being an uncommon. But the other one I want to breeze over really quickly is the Emerald Legendary Jasmine, 6 cost inkable 5/5 quest for 2. So this one is shift 5, and it reads, when you play this character, if you used shift to play her, return all other exerted characters to their player's hands. Now, I know what a lot of people are thinking, this card is absolutely ass if you don't have the shift line, which is very true. Very, very true. But I'm imagining this card in a deck where you're very much going all in. Like, let's say you have a decent amount of Jasmines, maybe you want to be playing Morph as well, or like, not that you want to be specifically playing Morph for this, but if you just happen to have so many other Floodborns that Morph pairs along nicely with, that could be quite good. But yeah, the more I thought about this card, I remember thinking, oh, if I can make this work within Emerald Amethyst, then it could be cool because I could potentially bounce my own cards back to really increase that value. But then also, it's important how you sequence this because it says, when you play this character, if you use shift to player, return all other exerted characters to their player's hands. So you have the decision to either exert your characters first to maybe gain some value out of if they have some bounce mechanics, or just simply protect them to add them back to your hand if they have some good on-play abilities. You can kind of start filtering that out again. But I think the effect is super, super cool. Really powerful. I am glad it has this if you use shift to player, because if it didn't, if it was literally just play this card, it'd be one of the best cards of the game. I think it would be absolutely insane. So, yeah, maybe some other people aren't too high on it specifically because it has that that restriction of if you use shift to play her. But I'm saying it's an interesting and good card in the context that we happen to play a lot of valid shift targets for this. But if that's not the case, then maybe the card won't be that playable, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think I was kind of hard on her when I reviewed her recently, and I'm still mostly in that camp, but I always try and play devil's advocate, and one thing that I do think is super good is, like, yes, needing to shift, we don't like, but just putting down a Jasmine, you are now threatening this. Like, whatever they've got going, if you've got a Jasmine on the board, then if this card becomes playable to the point where people might expect it, then now it's something that they need to respect to a degree. But where I was coming unglued was like, okay, well, even if they know they're playing into it, they quest out of everything, you play Jasmine, bounce it back to their hand. By that point in the game, when you've shifted Jasmine, do they have enough to just replay to the board? And it's like maybe buying you a turn. So maybe I'm not seeing the full potential yet. It's been known to happen. But she's super strong, and like I just love cards that have effects that are so unlike everything else that we've got. Well, maybe it's not completely unlike, but it's one of our few sort of like board clears that doesn't target, so that alone gives her so much innate value. Is there another card that anyone wants to bring up that they're particularly excited for before I bring up an example that I'd like to discuss?
Before Baker brings up the best one so far. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna bring up actually one that I think is not as good as people think. It's like the genie that people are gonna, oh, this is gonna replace Rabbit. I think that
genie.
I'm gonna go on the record and say that card is completely unplayable.
He's wrong. He's not better than Rabbit, but he's wrong.
Yes, finally a disagreement.
It's like, I think we have cards like Bruni. I think is better just because it's inkable. Like, I think the problem with, well, maybe it's because I have Ruby Amethyst Brain, but it's like the uninkable slot is extremely valuable in that deck. Yeah. And it's like we already have Rabbit, Be Prepared, and the Ladies. Like, is Genie really better than the Ladies? Probably not, right? So I think that's why in that deck specifically, I think it's completely unplayable. But I know some people are, oh, maybe you can play it in like Blurple. Maybe that could make sense, but I haven't really explored like that kind of option yet. But I think in Ruby Amethyst specifically, I think that card is completely unplayable.
Yeah,
I agree with that,
just before you go off, I will respond to that because I talked a lot about this Genie when I reviewed the other day, and I was more or less where you are. I was like, this is only ever if you want a 5th Rabbit. Like, that's the most plausible thing I could think of, really, to play this. Don't get me wrong, the evasive 2/4, you're probably always getting brawled, but you drew the card at least. But, like, the fact that it's 4 willpower, if you're not getting brawled, most of the stuff in format that is evasive is only built to hit 3 at most, because some people build to be able to beat the Diablo at Cove. So 4 is a willpower that, like, if you're just relying on evasive to take out evasive, that's probably not going to be enough. But yeah, I largely felt the same. Bannibal, I'm glad that you feel slightly differently, though. What do you think about this genie?
Okay, just let me clarify. It's definitely worse than Rabbit. I don't want anyone to start taking me out of context here. It answers, the fact that you can use it to answer Diablo is nice, but I think as somebody who's played a lot of Purple Steel aggro, not in major tournaments, but I've played a lot of Purple Steel aggro. I actually think it plays well with Doc, much better with Doc than Rabbit does. Rabbit's kind of like annoying with Doc sometimes. It's not horrible, but I think specifically in aggro deck where the evasive can matter, it's like a threat that you can sort of keep hidden to some extent, and also as a way to answer Diablo. Like if Diablo is a huge problem, I do think there's some room for the card, but yeah, I mean, it's not. No, I also it doesn't strike me as a card you play 4 of necessarily either. It just feels like the sort of card that you might stick 2 of in a deck, and
yeah. I think it as a meta response, depending on what the meta looks like. If that evasive 2/4 is relevant enough, then it's something that could come in for that reason. And like Ed said in Ruby Amethyst, not only do you not want to play many uninkables as it is, but you also kind of have secret uninkables, like goats a lot of the time, or castles in some matchups. They are definitely uninkables, so you have to be super careful. Kawa, your thoughts?
Yes, I'm gonna I know because we have very limited time. There's one more card. If we're on Ruby Amethyst brain right now, I really have to bring this one up. I can't believe I forgot about this card, but it's because it's in a different language. It's the 6-cost uninkable Amethyst Hades. So it's a 3/4 quest for 3, and it basically reads that whenever any of your other characters are banished, you gain 2 lore. I'm not too sure. I'm pretty sure. I think it's on your opponent's turn.
It's on your opponent's turn.
I looked at this card initially, was like, oh, like it's not great. They can Medusa it, whatever. And while if they Medusa it, that is, you know, it's pretty unfortunate. But what made me actually very intrigued about this card is this is a card that maybe incentivizes you to actually play into something like a Be Prepared rather than be a little bit more hesitant. If you want to make your board big enough, this Hades reads the Be Prepared the same way that the Lyle reads the Be Prepared. So if you're expecting that your opponent has that as an answer, let's say you're on something like 14 lore, you've got the Hades and 3 other characters, you know your opponent has to Be Prepared, you say, okay, go. Even in the situations they have to Medusa it, like that's their answer is Medusa the Hades, you still have these 3 other characters left, you can maybe quest up with it. But if they literally have the Be Prepared, they can't play it, because if they play it, you're going to say, fine, I'll go up 2 lore for each of these characters and I'll win the game. You know what I mean? Super interesting. So I don't... Yeah, like it's one of the first cards that I think you want to maybe purposely overextend and to Be Prepared. And the worst case scenario is they just Medusa it so you get to keep the rest of your board. But I'm curious to hear Ed's thoughts specifically about this, because again, I know it's another 6-cost uninkable card, right?
Yeah. So I have also thought about this card in the same way you're kind of thinking about it. I think there's kind of 2 ways to play Ruby Amethyst, I think, right now. It's like you can go like the really like aggressive strategy of like Flynn Sisu Castle, or like from like my new list I put out, like Cusco Crab, Finders, Ladies, Be Prep, right? And like depending on what deck you play, if you're playing like the Flynn Sisu Castle, this Hades is really good in that deck, right? Usually you get to like 12 lore extremely quickly with like the Flynn Sisu and just turning sideways, and that's like the best topper of the deck. Like you don't care, you're just like a non-interaction deck, right? All you're trying to do is just send it sideways, get to 20 lore as fast as possible. And I think in that shell, it makes a ton of sense. But if you're trying to play like an attrition style, like, you know, just kill all your opponent's cards and then you win by default, sending your guy sideways, maybe you bounce goat a couple times, I think it doesn't fit very well in that kind of shell. So I think there is a time and place for that if you're playing specifically like an aggressive version of Ruby Amethyst.
Yeah, that makes sense. Pretty interesting.
It's a blurple card. I think this is your blurple card that the people have been looking for. This is the card to play 2 turns after your 3-drop Mickey, in my opinion. I think Blurple's a deck that doesn't have a ton of removal, likes to play to the board, control the board with big characters like out of Amethyst, get to the late game early. This is a card that you play after your Foxes and your Mickeys. You take control of the board, and then you say, okay, your sweepers are bad now. You have to beat me on the board. I think it's a blurple card. That's how I feel. I don't know how beyond that.
Yeah,
but
no, it makes sense.
kinda
And
where I
like,
see it.
and we use the example of B prep, and yeah, like you say, when I talked about this card the other day, I said very much the same, that it creates a situation where like, okay, you've got 2 characters on board, you quest a 16, you have 4 lore on board, you quest a game next turn. Now B prep, if you've got the Hades, now B prep is not an out because you would win the game. And it's not just B prep, even if they've got characters on board, now just challenging me is not an out, because unless you remove this Hades. So yeah, I'm super keen on it. I want to talk about one more card before we wrap today up, which was only revealed a very, very short time ago. And I did have it here, but then I refreshed my feed and it's disappeared. I'm going to find it here it is. Okay, so a couple of you may not have seen this card yet. This is a new genie, Wonderful Trickster, 7 cost Inkable, 4/7, quest for 2, shift 5.
Oh my god.
Your rewards await whenever you play a card. Draw a card, and Forbidden Treasure at the end of your turn, put all cards in your hand on the bottom of your deck in any order. The look on Ed's face is priceless right now, the scowl I'm seeing. Please, Ed, Bannibal, give me your immediate reactions to this card.
Well, I read the first ability and I almost died inside. I was like, that can't be right. I guess the downside is there. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be an engine for sure. I think this feels like a card that'll see play. You'll have to make sure you're not going to get like stuck on clunky on inkables in this kind of deck, but it seems pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to quickly know it's not. I mean, obviously the ability and everything is super, super cool, but the general stats of the card are really good as well. 4/7's not easily removed either, right? Yeah.
It dodges everything. It's actually amazing.
Do you like this card?
Yeah, I mean, I think this card can work in like an aggressive, because I think I saw like the other card that they paired it with was like Clarabelle or something. I think it's probably not that pairing, unless maybe they're comparing the cards in terms of card draw. I think this is one of those, like, if you want to spill out your entire hand by turn 5, like, let's say what are like the good genies, like the 4-cost genie? Is there any other good genies?
So there's the new one that's coming out. Yeah, there's the 4-cost uninkable where you quest and you can draw 3 cards by shuffling it into deck. There's not a lot. There's there's more than we've got for other characters, to be fair. Some characters are really starved for shift targets, but not the point. There's definitely some
you can play with
here.
Like green purple with like the aggressive strategy, right? With like Cursed Merfolk, Flynn Rider kind of thing. And you can even play like Morph, for example, right? And you play like turn 2 Morph, and then turn 5 this, and then turn 6 you're just sending it. Like your whole hand is just all like, I can go draw all the 1 cost and you play like 6 1 costs in a row, something like that, right?
Yep.
So I think this is probably where this card would be good. Because I guess like if they ever kill it, you're in a really bad spot, right? If you're playing in like a normal deck and you just like lost your whole hand. So I think one of those kind of aggressive strategies.
I've got one concern.
Yeah, go ahead.
It reads a lot like Stitch Rockstar to me, and that's a card that has completely fallen out of favor. So I think this is better than Stitch Rockstar, but I think it's going to come down to like how much better it is.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and like what I like about it as well is just like Porpsicle is now draw 2. There's a purple song called It Calls Me, which lets you draw a card, is now just draw 2. Just that, like, jump of everything that was now drawing a card, and it was quite reasonable and fair. It jumps, but yeah, obviously the downside is there, but we talked earlier about a card like Yzma that's coming out, the Exert to draw up to 3. That's a card I'm super excited to pair this with. But yeah, I definitely think it's, if not the most powerful card in the set that we've seen so far, probably the most interesting, and the one that, like, there's definitely some brews to be made here for sure.
Is it ever a consideration? Sorry, this is the last point to make. Is there ever a consideration that if you're like, I kind of like what Ed's thinking about of like kind of going the more aggressive strategy, but is there ever a consideration that you're able to play this card out? And then, I mean, it's all going to depend on how much ink you have and stuff, but can you like abuse that card's ability and then like the last action or the last thing you do is just like bounce it back to hand? So now you've just a load of cards in hand and still a pretty decent board that you then don't get rid of your entire hand. I don't know if it's necessarily worth, but if your last play is using a Madam Snake to bounce the genie back to your hand, like you're removing the big body, but maybe you've so many cards in your hand and still after developing a board of say 1 or 2 drops that maybe it's potentially interesting, right?
I mean, there's an item that does. I think there's a 2-cost item in Amethyst. I think it's Wonderland Signs or something like that, where it's just to bounce back to your hand. But if this is an item that you can put on the board, so you can then use it when you're ready, then that's interesting.
I guess the difference is that you want to put Snake in your deck.
Yeah, that's the difference between that item and Snake. Yeah, it's probably true. Yeah.
Hey, you know, there could be a super combo one day. Who knows? But yeah, a super interesting card. But yeah, so that we don't overrun too much, because this has been such a good chat. We've talked about Seattle, and like it's been great to have you and get your perspectives and get your ideas about cards that you're excited for the future. But yeah, before we let you go, again, I'm sure everyone knows where they can find you. But if there is anyone watching at home that this is the first time that they're seeing you, Bannibal, where can they find you?
Oh God, I would say my YouTube channel, but I haven't made a video in like 2 months, so maybe that's not the answer anymore. I guess follow me on Twitter, I believe, at Bannibal Harca. Follow the team, Team Labyrinth on
shout out to Labyrinth.
Twitter, on YouTube. The ICL, I guess I'll plug the ICL too. Or,
yeah, sure.
The Illuminaires Champions League. They're trying to get together to do a live stream every Friday of some like good teams in the community, and pitting a bunch of well-known people against each other for content, which is a really fun idea, and I'd love to see that take off.
Yeah, I think it's great. Like, no, like obviously all respect to Labyrinth, but for a while it's kind of felt like they were the only team, other than Forbidden Mountain, obviously. So it's nice to see more teams rising up, because you know what's the point unless there's competition out there to test your skills against. Ed, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I recently also made a YouTube account, both at Ed Lorcana for YouTube and Twitter. And I think recently we're trying to start a team, and our team YouTube is at Tianhu TCG, TIANHU TCG, and we're trying to also start a team for the ICL as well. So we're trying to get all the continental qualifiers on that team, and give everyone a good match to watch.
Awesome, that sounds exciting. And Kawa, where can people find you and like-minded friends?
If you guys want to listen to the #1 English-speaking Lorcana podcast out there, you can go to @Podcana Podcast over on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at Kawatech_CG. I've been recently trying to cast more events of Lorcana as well. It's been a bit crazy. I've been traveling back and forth to France. In France, mate, I'm telling you, they love Lorcana. They do like massive tournaments nearly every single weekend. So if you guys want to see some casting of events, be sure to follow me on Twitter. Always love highlighting. One of my favorite things is highlighting players within the community that don't already have this existing platform, because you get to see so much deck innovation, so much creativity. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do.
And that is it. Again, a huge thank you to the chaps for joining me. Again, their socials, the places you can follow them and watch their content will be linked down below. But we're going to call it there. Long old video, but I hope you've enjoyed it. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe for all things Lorcana. Hit that like button to show your support, and we'll see you soon.